Happy birthday.
Thanks, Kyle.
How old are you?
I am 39 years old.
We almost got the big one.
I know.
Maybe next year.
1 year to go, maybe next year.
Yeah. Today's a really significant day because it is your birthday, but maybe not for the reason that most people say is significant when they're having a birthday. You were sharing before we started filming, you were reflecting on some time of when you were a child and on your original birthday.
Yeah.
What circumstances you were born into and where you are today. You want to share some of that?
Yeah, so I think it's, birthdays have always been weird for me because it's such, I think like a juxtaposition from where I am, where I am today to where I started. And, to think back on the circumstances, just like it brings up a lot of emotion for me. My mom, she was 19 when she got pregnant with me. My parents weren't married. My father was someone who, as a result of childhood abuse and neglect, lived with mental health issues that were never fully treated.
He never knew that he was even living with mental health issues.
No, and he self-medicated through alcohol, through marijuana, and as much as he could, coped and got by, but he was always in survival mode, and that meant doing whatever he could to get by for the family. So he would, find things in alleyways and cobble them together and sell them at swap meets. He would steal things, ended up in jail several times. But despite that, was a very loving man. But, those demons that really were such a theme in his life really bled into our lives as well. It really dictated how everything worked. And my father was so addicted to alcohol that my mom had to buy beer before she could buy groceries. And he would drink a case of beer a day. And so this idea of survival, I think, has been a theme, and that's really how I came into the world. I came into the world in this like fight or flight mode. They say that you can experience trauma in the womb, and I feel like that really set the tone for my life, for my personality, the way that I interacted with the world. And like I said, my father was in and out of jail, so there wasn't a lot of stability. We were very poor in an impoverished part of Phoenix, and and it just really led to this state of just always being in a heightened state, and and I really developed that sort of anxious personality at a very young age.
What was your first memory? What is your first memory?
Well, like I mentioned, my father was someone who he was very resourceful, and he found all these different bike parts that he had, found in alleys and, got from different places, and put together this bicycle for me. And I remember it had a green banana seat, and I would put, ball cards in the spokes.
Yeah, of course.
And but I remember when he gave me that bike, and that was like such a beautiful memory.
How old were you?
Gosh, I must have been 4 or 5.
Was it for your birthday or just for fun?
I don't know. I think it must have been for a birthday. But I also remember a time with him where there was a tray that always sat on the living room coffee table or under the coffee table that had his joints on it. I remember the smell of marijuana from a very young age. When I first smelled it when I was older, it was so nostalgic. It brought me back to those times when I was so young, But I don't remember him being around a lot, and in and out of jail.
Yeah.
So when when things got really bad, he would leave for days or weeks at a time, and we wouldn't see him.
And you guys didn't know where he went?
I mean, I think a lot of times, were times when he was in jail, but there were other times when he would be, trying to do something, trying to figure out some way to make a buck or to, do a job or something. And, and it was just this lifestyle. It was this very everything was transient. Everything was always in this state of upheaval. And it got to the point where, my mom, really, I think gathered the strength, despite her love for him and despite, everything that he tried, as much as he tried to overcome that, she eventually left and said, we have to go and live our own lives and leave him to his own devices. I was 6 years old.
You were 6 when you and your mom left?
Yep. Me, my little sister, and my little brother. So it was the three of us. She was 26 years old. And, and she was really the anchor for him. Without her, things spiraled out of control for him very quickly.
What mental health diagnosis do you have?
I've had.
And by the way, that's this is the only place where I would ask that, and it wouldn't be weird. It's hey, tell me about your mental health diagnosis.
No, well, I also told you that I'm, totally open book.
Yeah, so. Well, and we're everybody on this on MedCircle is, that's why we do these things to break the stigma.
Yeah. So I have had several over the years. I have been diagnosed with everything from ADD, seasonal affective disorder, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, you name it, I've been diagnosed, and I've taken the meds for all of it.
You say that in a way that makes me feel like you don't believe you have all those diagnoses.
That's funny. I like that you picked up on that. So fast forward to today, I don't really identify with any particular diagnosis. I think that I experienced a lot of trauma as a young person, and that created, and certainly I had genetic predisposition for things, but I think that created an environment where I was really susceptible to mental health issues. I also grew up in an environment where there were a lot of stigmas about mental health, and there wasn't support in the way that we have access to it today, and the understanding that we have of trauma and mental health diagnosis. So I think that a lot of what I experienced was circumstantial, and now that I have over the last decade or so done an incredible amount of work, certainly I still live with things. But I no longer identify as depressed or anxious or, a specific diagnosis.
How do you identify?
I identify as well.
As well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The moment, or at the age of 6, when you, your mother, and your siblings all left, talk us through what happened shortly thereafter with your father.
So he, without the support systems that, that he had, he really got mixed up in some pretty bad things and some hardcore drugs. He got arrested, went to visit his mom, my grandmother, in Detroit. Mm-hmm. She and her, husband were also addicted to alcohol, and they just had a very dysfunctional relationship. And it was, very shortly after that he took up in, this really kind of dank, seedy apartment, like motel, like transient place. And then very shortly after that, he killed himself.
And how did you find out about that?
I actually found out right away. It was something that I think is pretty rare. I remember the night that he died when they had found him, or when they told us. My grandparents were in the living room of our single wide trailer, and we were all standing there, and my grandfather told us that he had died by suicide. And I think, for a long time I really had some anger I had a lot of anger, but at my grandfather, for telling us and for knowing right away. But in hindsight, I think it was a gift, because the more of this work that I do, the more that I talk to people, and I hear stories about people who found out so long afterward that someone actually died by suicide. It was hidden from them because of shame, because of stigmas, and they almost are re-traumatized. You experience a death, and that's traumatic, but then to later find out how someone died, or find out that you were lied to. So I think ultimately it was really a blessing to know from the beginning. And even though I had, again, a lot of anger, I felt a lot of I blamed him. I felt that he was weak. I couldn't understand how he could leave us like that. How why we weren't good enough. And this is something that translated to me as this feeling of what did I do wrong? How, because I was a kid who was I had a lot of hyperactivity, and I didn't do well in school, and I was always kind of getting into trouble. And so I at a very young age I was dubbed a bad kid from teachers. And so I had this feeling of what could I have done better? If I were a better kid, if I what would have been different? And and then that translated to this very quickly, this feeling of now I'm the oldest, and I have to be I have this responsibility for my family, for my little sister and my little brother, and and so I was constantly worried and anxious about everybody, about everything.
At 6 years old, you felt this way?
Constantly. I had this just, every time my mom left the house, or every time, my grandparents would, leave, I would be worried that they would, get into a car accident, or something would happen, someone else would leave. I was just in this fight or flight panic state, all the time.
When your grandfather first shared the news with you, how did you feel in that moment? Do you remember?
I remember the scene. It was late, it was dark, and we were in the living room, and I just remember this kind of this flash in my head. It's weird because in hindsight, I don't think any of us were surprised. I think just given his who he was and what and it's it's always hard with memories from being a kid to distinguish what's yours and what was told to you and what but that's kind of what lives inside of me, is this feeling of I just don't think any of us were really surprised.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me the insight you have as a 6-year-old. I couldn't even tell you what I did at any point when I was 6 years old.
Well, what's interesting is that after that, I have a lot of gaps in memory. A lot of gaps in memory. I often say that I feel like I time traveled through most of my childhood because I wasn't mentally present for a lot of it. But there are a few very just visceral memories that stand out that are, that are just very clear.
How do you think your life would be different if your dad had not died by suicide?
That's funny. I was thinking about that this morning. I was thinking about, after my meditation this morning, would I want my life to be different? And the answer to that and the answer to your question is no. Like, I can't imagine what my life would be like. I don't know anything else, and I don't know if that's just my limited mental capacity to not imagine a different path. But despite all of the pain, despite all of the hardship that I've experienced, I wouldn't change it.
Well, you know, I don't know if there's a right answer to that question, but if there is, I think it's that. Because this is the path you're on. So to live in any other state other than I wouldn't change it, this is what I have, is, I don't want to say silly, but there's a silliness component to it because you don't get to choose that path.
Yeah. And the thing is that this path has also had incredible joy and beauty, and the work that I get to do because of this is so fulfilling and so rewarding that, like, I wouldn't have this insight, I wouldn't have this knowledge, I wouldn't be able to connect and share my story, and you know, none of this would be possible if I hadn't had those experiences. So I've come to a point where I'm very grateful for the life that I've had, you know, and yeah, it's a shame. And there, you know, we all have those what ifs. What if at a young age, you know, someone had recognized my behaviors as the result of trauma, as opposed to the result of a learning disability or being a bad kid, or, you know, he's just a poor kid, so, you know, that's just the way he is. How would my education have been different? You know, I had to go back and relearn basic arithmetic, spelling, grammar, because I just was not present. And in some cases, physically not present, because I was sent out into the hallway. I was sent to the principal's office all the time. And so I wasn't in school to be able to learn these things. I almost didn't graduate high school because of the gaps in my education and because of my mental health issues.
What do you want people to get from listening to you in this series?
I think, especially related to kids who are experiencing trauma or kids who are living with some type of mental health issue, do not dismiss them. Do not dismiss anybody as just being mentally ill or just being bad or just being dumb. Look at them as a human being, you know, look at who they are and what's going on in their life. What's the reason they're acting the way that they're acting? Where did that come from? You know, I've been doing some work in the prison systems lately, and I've been doing some work. Most recently, I spoke at a convalescent hospital, which is a long-term stay hospital for people with severe mental illness. And during my time there, I connected with some very brilliant people, incredibly intelligent people who have rich stories and have had successes in their lives, but didn't have early intervention, early detection and treatment of mental health issues, and have now landed in a place like that, which is a sad place for them to be. And it's so easy to dismiss them. It's so easy to see someone who's homeless or to see someone who's been, you know, previously incarcerated and just dismiss them. But I would encourage people to look at them in the eyes, see them as a human being, recognize their value, and it's amazing what you'll find, you know?
Yeah. Well, Jake Moore certainly lived a very eventful first 6 years of his life, but the events kept coming. In our next session, we will talk more to Jake Moore and what came next after his tragic father's death by suicide.